Could the Jedi of the Old Republic actually survive Order 66? Greetings again, Acolytes and lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. The Jedi of the Clone Wars are often regarded as the prime of the Order. Many of the greatest warriors in the history of the Jedi come from this era. Yet when Order 66 was enacted, very few of them managed to actually fight their way out. Those that did became living legends. But well over 90% of the Jedi in the galaxy were totally wiped out once the clone troopers opened fire. But this makes us wonder, what if the Jedi of the Clone Wars were suddenly replaced by their much stronger counterparts, the Jedi of the Old Republic era? Would the death toll still be as devastating, or would the clones suddenly find themselves at the bad end of the purge? Well, join us today, my friends, as we perform a timeline swap and see what would happen if the Old Republic Jedi were placed in Order 66. In an effort not to overcomplicate the scenario, we're going to tell it like this. All of the events of the Clone Wars happened exactly as it did in the lore, with one key change. Just before Order 66 was issued, a timeline displacement occurred, changing the positions of all of the Jedi in the galaxy. Those that we all know suddenly swapped places in time with their counterparts from the year 3653 BBY. This is the era of the Great Galactic War. In this era, the Jedi were facing a more visceral threat: Darth Vitiate's reconstituted Sith Empire. The Clone Wars was a grueling series of battles that lasted 3 years. It brought the Jedi who had only known peace to their very limits. They were forced to adapt in a very quick amount of time in order to become more battle-focused. This was just to combat the armies of battle droids though, those that dominated the Outer Rim systems. Fighting other Force wielders was a bit more rare in this era, as most of the Dark Acolytes trained by Dooku posed small threats to the overall order. The Acolytes were incredibly skilled, but definitely not the most powerful enemies the Jedi had ever seen before. They themselves were more powerful than any Acolyte that Dooku could train. By contrast, the Jedi of the Old Republic were forced to become something beyond human. If the Jedi of the Clone Wars were superhumans, then the Old Republic Jedi were gods among men. Instead of a war that lasted 3 years, the Great Galactic War lasted 3 decades, and those Jedi grew up knowing a state of conflict and darkness. This was their life. According to Star Wars The Old Republic Encyclopedia, by the time Padawans joined knighthood, they had the skills and experience of a decorated war veteran. These Jedi faced a wide array of enemies during these 30 years, including droids, soldiers, horrifying dark side beasts, and of course, Sith Lords. This was an era when the Sith were just as plentiful as the Jedi, and their empire was on equal footing with the Republic in terms of navy and military might. To accommodate this threat, the Jedi were trained to a different degree than almost all of their past and future incarnations. Facing insurmountable odds became their normality, and oftentimes the only thing that separated themselves from total oblivion was how fast that they could move their lightsaber. Guardians were one-man armies, each one worth the mettle of the battle masters from future incarnations of the Jedi Order. The normally more passive Jedi consulars were far from diplomats in this era as well. Their connection to the Force was so potent that they could summon miniature earthquakes with telekinesis, taking out groups of enemies at a time. Jedi Sentinels and Jedi Assassins were so adept at Force stealth that they could make themselves completely vanish from sight. Rare Jedi abilities like Force healing weren't just a specialized talent in this era, but a necessary skill for almost every member to know. And in this day, very few lightsaber techniques were off the table. The Forbidden Form 7 Juyo was regularly practiced among Jedi here. They knew that their adversaries would hold nothing back, and they had to be ready to do whatever it took to achieve victory. The Jedi of the Clone Wars, though, often struggled against advanced types of droid enemies, but in the Great Galactic War, the Jedi were specifically fighting the Sith. Things like soldiers and droids were nothing but fodder that got in the way of their true enemy. Even what a Jedi wore during the Old Republic era was vastly superior to their legacy counterparts. Jedi geared up in specialized battle armor that was engineered to shrug off blaster fire, explosions, and even protect against glancing blows from a lightsaber. As protective as it was also separated in such a way not to hinder their acrobatic movement and their blade work. Along with this, their individual potencies with the Force were so strong that their armored boots had cushioning for when their Force-assisted leaps took them to extreme heights or falls. Just like the Republic Commandos, Jedi were allowed to enhance their armor with cybernetics. This gave them extra strength, stamina, and survivability. But if all of that wasn't enough, some Jedi Knights were fond of taking Adrenals in battle to give them an extra boost. These Adrenals were performance-enhancing drugs stored in syringes that kept in a special compartment located located in the Jedi's right gauntlet. This allowed a Jedi to greatly exceed their limits or their energy, their pain tolerance, and even focus for a small amount of time. And because the Jedi have the ability to flush toxins out of their body with the Force, it's unlikely that these Adrenals had any sort of adverse effects. The bottom line being, these Jedi were battlefield machines. But of course, Sidious had expertly maneuvered the war so that all Jedi were spread out, isolated, surrounded only by their clone companies. So what would happen once this timeline swap actually takes place? Right off the bat, Jedi will still die. Being surrounded and fired upon from all angles is going to be a tall order to defend against, even for powerful Force wielders. But unlike the Jedi the clones are familiar with, these battle-minded warriors are not going to go down easily. The Clone Wars Jedi were blinded by the dark side and by their own arrogance. Even Windu in Attack of the Clones admitted that their ability to touch the Force had been greatly diminished. The Jedi did not sense the danger until it was far too late. The clones had struck without emotion, without fear, and without hatred. This made their actions incredibly difficult to sense in the Force. They could not sense the treachery because both of their blindness and because the clones had no emotion when they opened fire. They were simply following orders. Without malice, the Jedi could not detect that they were in danger as acutely as they could before. However, the Old Republic Jedi had no such hindrances. After fighting a grueling war with the Sith that they were actually losing, they had no pride or arrogance within them at all, and that made them truly dangerous. They had not been systematically manipulated. Their senses would be keen and on constant alert. So before this even starts, a vastly superior percentage of the Jedi survive this initial wave of Order 66, simply because they'll be able to sense it coming. Some may escape, others may strike first, but the clones are not getting the jump on these type of Jedi. Not Jedi that had been fighting the Sith in the trenches for 3 decades. For the Jedi wearing armor, they already have added protection against blaster bolt fire. They will be able to tank a few shots before getting put down, and this can mean all the difference in some cases. By the end of the Clone Wars, many Jedi went back to wearing robes as a statement that they were still keepers of the peace above warriors. But once they got shot once, the injury cost them the rest of their final stand. But with armor geared for taking direct blaster bolts, the Old Republic Jedi Guardians barely or even slowed down. In fact, they'll most likely be strong enough to release a Force repulse to blast the clones off their feet, allowing for the Knights and the Masters to reposition themselves. Either that, or they may decide to pop an Adrenal and take out their attackers by themselves. Ironically, as we mentioned before, the Consulars are equipped to use telekinesis to take out large quantities of enemies. While not as sharp with a lightsaber, they will be able to completely disrupt the ranks of many clones. They could take out the ground right beneath their feet with an earthquake, and turn every object in their vicinity into a hurricane of a deadly projectile. The Sentinels can simply escape by breaking a line of sight, and then using their stealth abilities to disappear. There, they either rendezvous with other Jedi, or they take out their attackers one by one like assassins in the dark. No clones, no matter how powerful and well equipped, is not enough to take out a fully fledged Jedi Shadow. They have been hunting Sith for decades. We believe a vastly superior number of Old Republic Jedi would survive the first wave of the Jedi Purge. Their next plan is likely going to group up with one another to be able to cover each other's backs. Despite each Guardian being a one-man army, they are trained to work in teams, making them stronger together. And once these Jedi start banding together, nothing short of heavy artillery will so much as slow them down, with the Guardians acting as the frontline vanguard, and the Consulars becoming their support, using abilities like Force Heal to keep them in battle, and to keep the fight going for prolonged periods of time, not to mention focusing on ranged telekinetic attacks. The Sentinels infiltrate the clone ranks. They dismantle them from the inside by using flanking tactics, and as more Jedi survive and group together, they will be able to mount an even stronger counteroffensive against the troopers, likely totally foiling Order 66 altogether. Jedi of the Old Republic were forged in the crucible of decades-long war with the Sith. They were better positioned to survive an event like Order 66 and would prove far superior than their Clone Wars counterparts. They lived in an era when the Sith were not shadows or whispers, but they were a constant, tangible threat. These Jedi trained with the full knowledge of their enemy's tactics, strengths, and their philosophy. Their lightsaber techniques and martial training were sharpened specifically for dueling other Force wielders, not just soldiers, not droids. The Jedi had hardened themselves to the psychological toll of war that had gone on for decades. Their skill set were built for survival in hostile territory, infiltration behind enemy lines, and direct confrontations with the dark side. Simply put, they were warriors first and diplomats second. More importantly, the Old Republic Jedi lacked the dangerous complacency that the Clone Wars Jedi had developed. The Jedi of the prequel era were fighting in a war orchestrated by an enemy they couldn't even properly identify, bound by political caution and the belief that the Sith were few and distant. By contrast, Old Republic Jedi fought with the desperation of survivors who had endured 30 years of brutal defeats. Their every decision was aimed at winning at any cost, which made them adaptive, unpredictable, and far less likely to be caught off guard and betrayed. In the face of something like Order 66, these veterans would not hesitate to turn on their clone allies the moment suspicion arose. They had already spent a lifetime expecting ambushes from supposed friends and allies. That readiness, combined with their war-tempered pragmatism, would make them far more likely to endure and far more likely to survive. So in effect, because of their battle-hardened mindset, increased skills and powers in the Force, as well as their combat expertise, the Old Republic Jedi have the capability to not only survive, but repel Order 66. This again comes as a result of their era, being more attuned to the movements of the Force. They're more aware of the influences of the dark. They will sniff out the Sith plot while these events are occurring and adjust their strategy accordingly. As for Darth Sidious's response to all of this though, we can only guess. From here we would be stepping into a what-if scenario, which wasn't really the intention of this video. We set out to find out if the Old Republic Jedi stood a better chance of surviving Order 66 than the prequel era Jedi did. Obviously there is a lot more nuance with the Jedi Purge than just the clones blasting down their generals. There are politics to consider, the state of the balance of the Force, and whether or not Darth Vader is involved at all. But for just the moment that the blasters were firing, were the Jedi ruined, or were they triumphant? We say they would be able to turn the Purge completely on its head. But what do you think, my friends? Did we give too much credit to the Jedi of the Old Republic era? If you would like us to do more comparisons between eras, then drop a comment down below and let us know. But until next time, thank you so much for joining us today, fellow students of the Force and lore junkies, and may the Force be with you always.